Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our live stream of Epic Castles of Europe. My name is Brandon Foster. I'm the owner and founder of Magic Land Vacations, the travel planning genies. And we're super excited today to share all the information about our very first and certainly not last group trip to explore the fantastic castles located in both England and Scotland and Western Europe. And I'm also joined by Derek Bacon, one of our incredible travel planning genius. Hello, Derek. How are you today?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule of serving our clients to actually come and talk about this incredible Europe trip that you really have spent so much time and thought to put together for an incredible group of people. Why don't we start today and just tell everyone just a little bit of a broad overview of why you wanted to put together a castle trip to Europe and what was the reason behind that?
Sure. So I had a really personal passion for traveling to Europe, and I started with England because I have friends there. And my first visit was back in 2019, and then I went back with my dad in 2023 on a father-son trip. Um, Always reconnecting with my friends, but I really have a passion for the history and the history, the architecture, the stories, the human connection, all of that that can be found by exploring these places. As Americans, our country nationally has a very strong tie with England because we were part of the colonies. So there's that part too. And Brandon approached me probably like about 6 months ago now, maybe 7, and was like, "Hey, you're posting a lot about your travels to London on your social media. What do you think about doing like a group trip to England and Scotland?" And England was great, but Scotland's even better because I've never been. So I will be experiencing it for the first time with everybody else, and I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm so grateful that you're helping put this together. And why don't we go ahead and go over the itinerary with everybody so they really know what to expect? And I think what's really exciting about this trip in particular, as opposed to there's a lot of different group trips you can take to Europe that are already kind of put together. But what makes this one really unique and really special is the focus on castles, the focus on medieval history, and not just medieval history, the lore, the legends, places where kings and queens walk, places where people were beheaded, but also the cinematic history as well, because I am a graduate of Florida State University's film school. I have a deep love and passion for film. And so we're also visiting castles that have been featured in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter series, as well as some of your very famous television shows like The Queen and Downtown Abbey and things of that nature. So really excited about all of that. I am going to just briefly cover the main castles before we go into the actual full-scale itinerary. But September the 3rd is when we depart from the United States. September the 4th, this is 2025, obviously, because we're in October. September the 4th, we arrive in London. We fly overnight. Optional sightseeing at Warner Brothers Studio Tours, Making of Harry Potter. September 5th, we do Windsor Castle and Hampton Court. September 6th is Tower of London. September 7th is Warwick Castle. September 8th is York Minster. September 9th is Alnwick Castle, and we travel to Edinburgh. I forgot Clifford's Tower, also in York. And then September 10th is Edinburgh Castle, which is actually what's pictured right over here. And then we depart from Edinburgh to hit back home. So that is the very nuts and bolts basics of this itinerary, Derek. Why don't we dive into the actual itinerary itself? We can actually come back to the accommodations. But what I would love for you to do is just tell us briefly 2 to 3 sentences what we're doing that day, and why that castle has an historic significance behind it and what's exciting about that particular landmark.
Sure. So day one is because it is an arrival day, it is like London at leisure. We do have the Harry Potter experience for anyone that wants to add that onto their package. It is a premium experience, so do know that there is an additional cost. But it is amazing. It is the Leavesden Film Studios. It's sort of their equivalent of like Warner Brothers or Universal Studios that's out in Hollywood. This is like their major film studio. You can see there they have a model of Hogwarts that they used during filming. They have thousands of props. They have people that worked on the film there to guide you through. They talk about the special effects. You have some immersive experiences within reconstructed sets on the property. So it's really cool. If you're not going to Harry Potter, there is tons to do still. London is a massive city, and it is a choose your own adventure. There are many, many museums. Most of them are free. There's markets. There are theater shows. There's everything that you could possibly want to do. Fabulous world-class shopping, etc. I will have a list, like a short list of like my favorite attractions in London for everybody to kind of like have a starting point. So everyone that goes will get it's either going to be a small book or at least a like a pamphlet handout so that you have something to start your day.
Love it. Okay, so let's go to the actual first full day, which is Windsor Castle and Hampton Court. So tell us just a few sentences. What is Windsor Castle known for, and why is that special for the first day?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So Windsor Castle is the quintessential castle. It is almost 1,000 years old. It was built by the original castle was built by William the Conqueror in near 1066 or thereabouts. It has obviously evolved and been added onto. It is currently an active royal residence, meaning we can't see all of it. We can see what they call the state apartments, which are the very public rooms, and the grounds. That's the Long Mile there. You might have seen it on TV. It's where Harry and Meghan drove in from London on that. It's also a very famous like horse processional. It's been used in a lot of film. And if it's not used directly, it is referenced a lot, especially in media like The Crown and The Queen. It was Queen Elizabeth's favorite residence in London, in England. And she really made sure that it lasted because in 1992 it had a devastating fire. That room that you're seeing there, the music room, was actually one of the rooms that was completely destroyed. And she had it faithfully restored as it would have looked prior to the fire. So it's a really, really cool place. And who knows, you might brush elbows with royalty. The one time that I was there, she was actually there. And then this last time that I was there, they were getting ready for King Charles and Camilla to arrive for a Shakespeare event in Windsor.
That's amazing. All right, so let's move on to Hampton Court. Now, I know this one a little bit because this was very famous for a particular time of royal history. And the royal family, or royalty, I should say, kept changing and renovating. And so you can tell what time period certain pieces of Hampton Court were added on or renovated, that kind of a thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So Hampton Court was built during the Tudor period by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. For those of you that are not familiar, he was the chief advisor to Henry VIII and his link to the Pope. Famously, he failed to get the original divorce from wife number one, and so as a sort of a bribe, he gifted Henry his beloved Hampton Court Palace. And Henry made it his pleasure palace. And then throughout the subsequent years, William and Mary eventually inherited. This would have been like 250 years after Henry. They inherited the castle, and they wanted to make it a rival palace to Versailles. Hence, why the front and the back look so very different. If they would have had the money, we would not have the Tudor sections at all. They would have completely demolished the palace and built a new one. But because they ran out of money, they preserved the front, so you get to see some of the Tudor palace and architecture. But the back, if we can go to that view, is really famous. So speaking of like media, you might have seen me like whisper something earlier in the webinar. It has been famously used multiple times in Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte. So for those of us that are huge Shonda Land fans with the Bridgerton series, that view is very familiar to us. Also, one of my favorite films, The Favorite, with Olivia Colman, was shot here.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's going to be an action-packed, truly first day over in England, staying in London. Now, day 2, we go over to the Tower, or I should say full day 2, we go over to the Tower of London. I actually am somewhat familiar with the Tower of London, Derek. I know this is where Henry VIII was and beheaded a few of his queens at the Tower of London. And I also know that this is where the crown jewels are. Tell us a little bit about the Tower of London.
Absolutely, yes. So the Tower of London was one of the first Norman buildings to be built after the William the Conqueror in 1066. It is an amazing place. It houses the crown jewels, like you said, and it's the only place that you can go see them. And not only are Anne Boleyn and Catherine Parr, as well as other associates of Henry VIII and other royalty that were beheaded, they're buried there at the chapel St. Peter ad Vincula. So you can walk through and kind of pay your respects. I know I'm a huge Anne Boleyn fan, so I visit every time. And while you're there, there are these fabulous, we know them as beef eaters. You might recognize them from the gin labels in the United States. We see them a lot. But they are royal, sort of like royal bodyguards. That's kind of how they started. And they actually live in the tower. So they are like invaluable sources of information. And they want to interact with you. So it's a great way to kind of have that link to people who live in this ancient building. And they give you a perspective on like how much history is contained like within the walls.
That's amazing. I love it. So let's move on. Now we have we have London at leisure for that afternoon where we're seeing the Tower of London, which is really exciting. So you could go to Kensington Palace if you wanted to, Westminster Abbey. You could go to Buckingham Palace. You could go to the Borough Market, where they have a really awesome assortment of spices and food and all sorts of things around the globe. And then you could also go to Handel and Hendrix, which is a home that had 2 music icons, Handel that wrote The Messiah, and also Jimi Hendrix as well. So lots of fun things to do on day 2. Let's go on to day number 7. And at this point, we're actually checking out of our London hotel, which we'll share a little bit about in a second. And we're on our way to York. But on our way to York, we are going to stop at Warwick Castle. And I remember visiting Warwick Castle on a Europe trip when I was in high school many years ago. We will not disclose the date, but it was incredible. And it's actually privately owned. Tell us about Warwick Castle.
Yeah, so Warwick Castle is in construction very similar to Windsor Castle. It is a motte and bailey, which basically means that there is a motte is it's an old-fashioned word for moat, and the bailey would be what we call the keep or the round tower on top of the hill. It has been restored in the, I believe the restoration started in the mid 1800s. I will have to go back and check my notes. But the neat thing about this castle is, though it's privately owned, you do get to see quite a bit of the inside spaces and the inner workings of the castle. And there are experiences that you can do while you're here. You can take an archery lesson. You can learn about period dress in the Tudor period. So, like how we saw that picture earlier of, I believe it was either a young Queen Mary or a young Elizabeth. You can learn how they dressed, how King Henry dressed, etc. They also, I know for a time they were teaching classes on falconry, which is an ancient English custom. Actually, Anne Boleyn's family was really famous for falcon keeping or falconry. So that's kind of a little bit about Warwick Castle and what's there.
Love it. I know. I'm really excited about Warwick Castle. I cannot wait to visit Warwick Castle. That's going to be super fun. And then we spend the night over in York, and we wake up the next day in York, and we are at, I was going to say York Castle, but if you are familiar with medieval history, York Castle is pretty much destroyed. So there's basically like a piece of York that's left called Clifford's Tower. And then there's also York Minster. So tell us a little bit about York Castle and York Minster, please.
Yeah, so you're correct in that York Castle is in ruins. The most complete ruin that we have is Clifford's Tower, which is right there. It is the Bailey, or the keep, as I was explaining earlier. A lot of these Norman structures were constructed in very much the same way. Just real quick, sort of the difference between a castle and a palace. Castle, think fortress. Palace, think like huge mansion built to impress, opulence, you own everything, that kind of a thing. So this was a fortress. So you'll notice it doesn't have anything super fancy. It probably, other than like a floor between these two levels, it probably didn't have much more than what it has now. And it is a site of really bloody battles. Unfortunately, there was a very strong anti-Semitic movement throughout history in York during several periods, and this castle does show battles of those times. But there is also a military museum attached to Clifford's Tower, which you can gain access to if you want more background on that.
Love it. And then we also have York Minster, which is a cathedral nearby as part of York. And that has been featured on BBC's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell and ITV's Victoria. Tell us a little bit about this Gothic cathedral.
Yeah, so York Minster. So for those of you that have been or are planning on visiting Westminster while we're in London or have already in the past, York Minster is very much similar to Westminster. However, there are some key differences. York Minster is actually older by, I want to say, a couple hundred years. And the experience you get at York Minster is much more personable, much more private, because it's not as famous as Westminster. And so you really get a chance to get up close and personal with this type of architecture. They have guides that will take you through, and you'll really get a sense of the craftsmanship and the effort that it took to build these huge buildings. And when I say like old buildings, I mean like think prior to the Renaissance. So these buildings were built anywhere from like the middle thousands to like 1400. And they are incredible.
Yeah, I mean the inside, just like these few pictures, make it look absolutely incredible, and I'm sure it's going to be even more amazing in person. Okay, so the next day we actually check out of our stay over in York, and we head toward Edinburgh. So going over to Scotland, but on the way we stop at Alnwick Castle. Tell us about Alnwick Castle. I don't think Alnwick is one of those that a lot of people are as familiar with as maybe some of the other castles.
Probably not, but I'm sure that a lot of people have seen it. So Alnwick Castle is located just south of the Scottish border in a very small town of the same name. And it has been in the Percy family for over 700 years. So once again, we're at a privately owned castle. This is actually where they live. And it is open to the public for tours. That's how they sustain the maintenance of the building and the grounds. There is the library there, which has stood in for Buckingham Palace, actually, during the filming of several of the Downton Abbey episodes and I believe, the first feature film. It also stood in for Buckingham Palace during The Crown. So that was just a neat little tidbit there, linking it to the theme history to Hollywood. And you can also see things like there is a gentleman there practicing falconry. There are people in period dress. Once again, very much like Warwick Castle in terms of like offerings, but a very different history in terms of what it has done. And it's very prevalent in Harry Potter as well. So those of us that love Harry Potter are going to recognize some things as we go through. And it's also in a really cool little town with lots of neat sort of side things. So after the tour, if there's time, I will have like a short list of things for us to explore on our own before we head to Edinburgh.
Love it. And also, if you are a Kevin Costner fan, this is also where they film pieces of Prince of Thieves, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves as well.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. So the next day, we are at Edinburgh Castle. And Edinburgh Castle really dominates the skyline of Scotland's capital. And it was really played a pivotal role in the Wars of Independence and the Jacobite rebellions. And they have their own crown jewels. Tell us a little bit more about Edinburgh Castle, Derek.
Yeah. So Edinburgh Castle is ancient. It is pre-Renaissance. It is on top of a volcanic formation. That's that rock there. So you see it as naturally defensive. As like I said, castles, think fortress, think war. That's kind of it's the perfect spot, really. Because it's very hard to escape from and it's very hard to get to. And the only way that you can do it is if you know the way to get there. So it does have a really dark history on occasion. It's been the site of, like you said, many rebellions. And it's also been the site of many sort of, kings and queens in waiting in terms of Mary Queen of Scots. She was always waiting to figure out what was going on with England. I'm not going to throw in any conspiracies here, but her own people eventually rebelled against her, and she fled to England in search of aid and was imprisoned and later killed. But this would have been her home. You can see her bedchambers. Actually, there is a historical reenactor there. That's what Mary Queen of Scots would have looked like. Very conservative, and it's also a very complete castle. So where Windsor Castle is very old, it is largely reconstructed because of the fire that happened in 1992. A lot of what's inside of this castle is original to its construction. So we're talking, materials and rooms that are, almost 1,000 years old. So.
Wow. Yeah. It's amazing. Okay. And then the last stop is the Palace of Holyrood House, which I don't even know what that means or what that stands for. What is this Palace of Holyrood House?
Sure. So Holyrood House and Palace is actually two sites in one. So there is a palace, but there's also the remains of an abbey. The abbey was desecrated during a period that they call the Rough Wooing. So our good old pal Henry VIII, when he had Edward, he actually wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, to be um, his wife, and tried to essentially force submission of her hand in marriage to his son, to unite the two kingdoms. But she was already promised to the Dauphin of France. And also he was notoriously not Catholic because of his bad luck getting a divorce from his first wife. And Scotland at the time was very proudly Catholic. And so he basically tried to force them into submission. And I've watched documentaries on Holyrood, and they talk about how you can actually see like burn marks and things where he tried to essentially force his hand over an entire nation. But it is also just like, it's kind of getting away from like the darkness of it. It's kind of a place where when people think like a ruin, or when they picture like castles in, especially in the British Isles, it is incredibly picturesque. And there is a lot of history there. And then Holyrood House, or Holyrood Palace, is the official residence of King Charles in Scotland. So you have sort of the Buckingham Palace effect on this site that we get to see.
Wow, that's amazing. Very, very, very cool. Very, very fascinating history. So those are the main places that we are going to visit. I know I'm just scrolling through everything. Let's talk briefly about where we are going to stay. So when we are in London, we're going to stay at the Millennium Hotel and Conference Center in Gloucester, London. This is a 4-star hotel, and it has a great location. It's very close to the subway. Isn't that correct, Derek?
Yes. So the Millennium Gloucester, I'm actually staying there in about 2 weeks. So I'll get the scoop for everybody. But it is a 4-star conference center, like you said. So it's going to be a little more corporate feeling than some of the other places that we're staying. But the reason that we selected this is the location and also the reputation of the hotel. Millennium brand in general has some very impressive properties in their portfolio. They own the Knickerbocker in Chicago. Amongst them, I've stayed there. It's wonderful. And I trusted the brand, and the rooms themselves can be set up in a number of ways, which we'll get to registration later, but you can set it up as a double occupancy with 2 single beds. You can do 2. There's been different arrangements. So the rooms are quite nice, especially for Europe, where rooms can be a little tiny. It's a good size.
Amazing. And we stay there 4 nights. And then after the Tower of London, we check out. So yeah, 4 nights. And then Sunday we go to Warwick Castle. So let's go to Sunday and we check out, and then we check in at the Grand Hotel and Spa, which is over in York. And tell us just a little bit about the Grand Hotel and Spa.
Yeah. So this is the one that I am most excited for, I think. It's in an older building. It is I want to say 4-star. It could even be 5. So full transparency, all hotels on this are 4 or 5-star. But it does have a pool. The Millennium Gloucester does not. This one does. And it's right in the middle of everything. It's in the old town. York is a medieval walled city, so you can actually like see the gate, like where people would come in and out, and they'd close it at night for security. So it is in the middle of all that. And it's just a really cool place, and I'm super excited. Once again, the rooms not small, at least from the pictures, they don't look tiny. So that's always a plus.
Absolutely. So then we spend two nights in York, and then we head over to our third stop and check in, which is at the I don't know how to say this, Dalmoy Hotel and Country Club, which just
Mhm.
looks beautiful.
Yes. So this one is um, when people go to Scotland, and actually one of our travelers already has told me that she plans to extend her vacation beyond what we're doing, to stay in castles for about a week. So a lot of people that own castles in these large estates in Scotland have either turned them into hotels like what we see here, or they turn them into like their own rentals. So this hotel is in an old manor house. It's over 250 years old, the building is. And it has lovely meeting spaces. The rooms are really lovely. They are interesting. Some of them are larger than others because it is in it's sort of retrofitted into a larger building. But once again, none of the rooms looked shabby at all. In fact, they look quite nice, and they are boasting Scottish tartan. So you know exactly where you are.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so why don't we go over? We've been going over the itinerary. Why don't we switch gears a little bit and let's go over what all is included in this vacation, this group trip? I know that accommodations are included. I know that admission to these historic palaces and castles are included. What else is included in this trip, Derek?
Absolutely. So we have included breakfast every day. That is one meal out of three or two, depending on how you eat.
And this is not boxed cereal, y'all. This is not boxed cereal. This is not like grab a banana to go. This is
Mm-mm.
hot breakfast at each one of these resort hotels where you actually can have, scrambled eggs, maybe pancakes, waffles, but like legitimate
Oatmeal.
hot breakfast. Yeah.
You can also do a full English breakfast. I know a lot of people are curious about that, so you can do that. It's a lot for breakfast. You only really need that in dinner if you're going to do a full one. At least for me, that's all I need. But yes, you can get quite the meal, and those are included. We also have two three-course dinners. So a welcome dinner on the first day in London and a farewell dinner on the last day in Edinburgh, which will include three courses. I believe there will be alcohol options for those that wish to imbibe. It will include soft drinks, of course. And it will be at nice restaurants. We're not talking Fridays or Chili's or Applebee's. We're talking, maybe like Longhorn or, something a little more upscale. So don't think like super fancy, because we're not trying to go, tuxedo and all that. I mean, if you're comfortable in that, that's great. But generally speaking, we want to make these first and last dinners sort of elevated experiences. So
I love it. So breakfasts are included, two dinners are included, hotels are included, accommodations are included. You also have private transfers, which, you know, private transfers and transfers in general, right? It's private because it's for our group. And then the transfers because we're going to a lot of different places. And that's a huge load off everybody's back you do not have to worry about, right? Is we're going to get you from point A to point B, basically from doorstep to doorstep. Basically, the second that you arrive into London, we are going to have an arrival time so you all can book airfare that is good for you. And then we're going to basically have everybody meet at a certain time point for that transfer over to our first hotel, the Millennium. And the other thing I want to add too is that this also includes your tour guides and tour conductors. It is a little bit different depending upon where we are and what historical site we're going to. Some historical sites don't allow private guides or private tours into the property. They have their own people that do tours for free. Some of them, we will have a guide going in with us. So there is a little bit of variance there, but you are really looking at a very well thought out, very top to bottom planned trip where you don't have a lot of stress, you don't have a lot of worry, and you still have some great free time for you to explore the cities a little bit on your own to do some shopping. And of course, our tour guides and tour conductors and ourselves will be able to make some recommendations of what to do. I know there is one particular place that Derek was hoping to go have tea at, and it has a little bit to do with Titanic. Tell us about one of those little extra things that people could do.
Sure. Yeah. So after our tour of Anak Castle, I mentioned that Anak is a really neat sort of smaller town or smaller city, depending on how you want to like classify it, that has some really interesting things. One of those things is the White Swan Hotel, which is it's an old what they call a coach inn or a carriage inn that was built in the mid 1700s. And when they renovated in the 1930s, they purchased several pieces of interior decor from the Olympic, which is the slightly older and nearly identical sister ship to the Titanic. And one of these interiors is the first class lounge. And it has the infamous piece of door or whatever you want to call it that Kate Winslet floats on, and people say, both of them could have fit and whatnot. But it has that specific section of paneling in the room. And it really gives you a sense of what it would have been like to sit in a room on the Titanic. And it differs from things that we see in the United States. Like when you go to the Titanic museums, they have recreations of the interiors, but these are actually interiors that were worked on by the same hands, side by side, same age, same materials. And it gives you a little more of an authentic experience. It also, the White Swan is a mecca for people who study the Titanic. There's a recreation called Titanic Honor and Glory. For anybody who has a VR headset, I highly recommend downloading it. By the way, this is not paid or anything. This is just me fangirling right now. But it's really cool. But they have gone to the White Swan to take measurements and photographs and everything, because these interiors have been preserved.
Wow, it's amazing. Okay, so I think I can briefly go over what's not included. And then if I miss anything, Derek, let me know what I miss. So what is not included in the package price is going to be your airfare to wherever you are in the United States to England and then back from Scotland. Also, what's not as included is any porterage fees, which is basically like bag handling, that kind of a thing, having people take your bags to your room, that kind of a thing. And then some of the meals, and then any additional shopping or what you do in your free time. Those are the basic things that are not going to be included in this. Derek, did I miss anything?
Not necessarily. Oh, gratuities, tips. So tipping works a little bit differently in the UK than it does in the States. So generally speaking, tips are appreciated, but they are not sort of an unwritten requirement as they are here. And actually, like in restaurants, tipping is generally considered like a no-no, because they view it as them being paid like a living wage. We're not going to get into the politics. I'm just letting you know that from Europeans, this is what I've heard. So tipping is different, but it is not included in the price. And then in terms of porterage, Brandon, I do believe the price includes porterage for one bag, but others are additional.
Got it. Love it. Thank you so much for correcting me on that. Important information for sure. Okay, so let's talk about what the cost is. I can cover the cost. Okay, so these are the costs. The first cost that we have is actually for 2 people. So this is per person double occupancy. So it's only $4,129, which includes everything that we just talked about for double occupancy. So for 2 people, that would be around $8,300 for 2 people. to go on this trip. And then we have a registration fee, a good faith deposit, if you will, that is $175 for a couple or for two people, double occupancy. And then we have a per person single occupancy, which is only $5,394. And the registration for that is only $125 for the single occupancy. So those are the prices. Now, obviously, if we get a lot more people to go with us, so if we have over 20 people that go with us, then the prices start to go down. So it's really important that you all share with your friends and family and anybody else who would be really excited to go and explore castles, to invite them to go on this trip with us to England and Scotland. Now, what are the deadlines, Derek, for people who want to register and the deadlines for the actual final payment of the trip?
Yes. So the registration deadline is November 15th.
Yes.
And so the initial payment is due, which is the $300 initial payment. You can always pay more. That is due January 31st, if I remember correctly. And then the final payment is due in June of next year. I don't know the specific date, but I know it's in June.
Love it. All right, so let's talk about the registration process. The registration process is really, really, really simple. And I'm going to go ahead and share a different screen so you can kind of actually see what this registration process is actually going to look like. So we have basically we have a double registration process. It looks like this. Derek, just kind of briefly walk them through what happens on the registration process.
Sure. So you're going to be sent to a link that sends you to a type form. Type form is a sort of electronic sort of questionnaire that like goes through slides, and you answer each question. And then the final page will be, after you've entered your information and answered all the questions, it will ask you to make what we call the good faith deposit or the registration fee, which is what Brandon was talking about earlier. And this registration fee goes to planning your, managing your trip, helping you with any travel plans post and pre group itinerary time, airline helping with booking and all that stuff. It also goes toward a really super cool secret surprise that we're working on for everybody, and a charity of our choice, which we've narrowed it down to a few, but I don't think we've actually officially announced which one it is yet. And then after that, we will enter you into our secure booking system, and you will receive a link to set up your client portal. This is where you will enter, once again, personal information that is important for us to know. It is super important that we have this because if something happens or if we lose some material or some information, we have it all in a secure database. And then you will also enter like billing information and that kind of a thing so that we can process payments on your behalf. And I think that's it.
That is amazing. So if people have questions about this trip, Derek, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Oh, I have many. So my preferred is Derek at magiclandvacations.com. You can see it on the bottom of the screen there. And I will get back to you. My normal time is about 12 hours. Sometimes sooner, but maximum is 12 hours. I am in the Eastern time zone. So do be aware of that. If you're on the West Coast and you message me at 9:00 at night, I'm probably asleep. So I will get back to you at my earliest convenience the next business day. You can also reach out to me via social media. Facebook is Derek with Magic Lamp Vacations. TikTok is Travel Genie Derek. as is Instagram. So same handle for TikTok and Instagram, Travel Genie Derek. And one quick thing, I was raising my hand earlier. I just wanted to get this out before the end of the webinar. When we say, double registration or couples registration, you don't have to be a couple. You can be best friends. You can be father-son. You can be mother-daughter. You can be mother-son, et cetera, et cetera. It really is just a chance for you to share the experience with somebody that you know and love. So you're in a room with somebody that you trust, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, we're all trustworthy, but I mean, I would want to share a room with my best friend or my dad or my mom, somebody that I know. And I can tell you from experience, traveling with my dad to these places is really special. It's something I'll never forget. So definitely worth the experience.
I love it. I'm adding this right now as I talk to anybody who wants Derek to reach out on social media. You can also just comment Castle if you want Derek to follow up. So if you comment Castle, whether you're watching on Facebook land, YouTube, I put the link to Travelify and the registrations in there as well for all of you that are on YouTube land. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Please make sure, again, you reach out to Derek at magiclandvacations.com if you have questions, or like I said, you can comment on social media. Castle, if you want Derek to personally follow up with you, he'll be looking for those that comment. The registration deadline, again, is going to be November the 15th. That's $125 for single occupancy, $175 for double occupancy. And then the initial payment is going to be due by January 31st. That's $300 per person. So $300 single occupancy, $600 for double occupancy. And again, the pricing for that is per person double occupancy only $4,129. Per person single occupancy only $5,394. And we are so excited about this trip. So grateful to put this together for all of you. And we can't wait to see all of you who decide to join us. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it very, very much.